Hey everybody, today's video is going to be a little different. My friend Mikayla is a transgender non-binary person whose pronouns are they, them, and who's from the Central Valley. And about 2 months ago, they were in New York, right as the coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak really started to take off. Although their vacation was cut short, they were able to make their way back home, but after they got home, they noticed they had some symptoms. So this is going to be a recording of my chat with Mikayla, just to catch up and see how they're doing and let them tell their story of what it's like to have the coronavirus for a very long time. They've had symptoms for almost 2 months now. I hope this is an insightful chat for you and gives you a glimpse into the lives of someone else trying to do their best during the pandemic. Hey, Mikayla.
Hi, Kyle.
How are you doing today?
I'm alive.
I'm very glad you're alive.
I'm having a lot of chest pain. It's right underneath my chest bone. It's pretty much been in the same spot for today's day 57. So I think
oh my gosh.
The chest pain wasn't like on day one, but it's been the longest like symptom of this COVID-19 after effect that I've had. Everything else kind of comes in waves, but the chest pain has been pretty consistent. So I'm having pain today a little bit. So bear with me if I'm a little winded while talking.
Of course.
Shortness of breath too. Seems to be a lot better today than yesterday, but just doing very little. Walking around the house, coming downstairs to go to the kitchen to get, some Gatorade or something to drink. Sometimes is enough to knock the wind out of me, and I'll just sit on the couch for a while and try to get the energy to get back upstairs, or sometimes just stay downstairs all day long, really.
Oh my gosh. Can you tell me the quick synopsis? When did you leave for New York?
I left for New York on March the 10th. I had, previously planned that on March 10th I'd go to New York, and I was not in New York until the morning of the 11th. As you either arrive very late or you arrive very early in New York, there's no convenient time to get to New York. So I got there on the morning of the 11th. Which was the last day that Broadway was open. So I had a pretty packed day where I dropped my luggage off and I went and saw the matinee of Jagged Little Pill and met up with a friend for a early dinner after the show. And then she works in merchandising happened to be my next show. And as she went in for her breakdown of the evening and get her synopsis of tasks that they wanted everybody to know, they did confirm that an usher that worked there had tested positive for COVID. And it didn't seem as real to me at that point because, so many people that are in New York all the time. And, even the word on the street while I was waiting to get into the 6th show was, people talking about, oh, what do you think of this coronavirus? And do you think it's actually going to hit here? And
wow.
Broadway wasn't the same even when it was open on the 11th, and I got to the first show. A nice lady had wiped down my seat, and the whole place smelled like sanitizer. And
they were already
everybody was really taking care of each other, just like how you would think New York would be. And I had wipes and was prepared to do so, but it was already done. There was a lot of talk with people I know that work in theater that a lot of us aren't going to be able to make it if they shut down Broadway. Like, I really hope that they don't do that. And there was a lot of conversation on the 11th I was having about that, and then I had tickets to see the premiere, first preview performance of a new show called Flying Over Sunset. That I was a little concerned that it might get canceled. It seemed that the morning chit chat was that shows were potentially going to shut down except for off-Broadway, which are houses that have like 499 seats or less.
It's a bit smaller, yeah.
The press conference said we're taking this seriously, and Broadway League has shut down all productions. But there was still this question about off-Broadway, what was going to happen with off-Broadway. And on that night, on the Thursday, the 12th, a lot of off-Broadway shows still went on. Some of them didn't know if they wanted to. Some of them had a temporary one-night suspension just to think about what to do, because they technically weren't covered by the rule of...
Right. There wasn't the same jurisdiction.
Thursday I had, 2 show cancellations. And then that Friday, the next day, most off-Broadway shows at that point had decided to shut. There were definitely shows going on the 12th, but by the 13th, it was all shuttered. They all decided at that point voluntarily that it's probably not the best idea to be having groups. Airbnb was trouble at first too, as part of my trip was going to Baltimore and Washington D.C. area, and so I had an Airbnb for a long duration there, and at first Airbnb said, we are not offering any refunds. The person that owned the building where I was renting like an entire place. So it wasn't like a room. I was like at an entire place. And the owner said that he understood if I didn't feel comfortable going, that he would do a refund. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure. I was actually on a boat going to the Statue of Liberty while he was messaging me. And I was like, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. And and by the time I left Liberty Island, Airbnb changed their policies and said if you had a reservation in a hot zone, we're automatically refunding. Okay. And it automatically canceled my Airbnb for Baltimore. Wow. So
now you mentioned trip to the Statue of Liberty. Tell me more about that, because it was interesting to hear about what the practices were like at the Broadway show you went to the night before, or on the 11th. What was the mood and the attitude like at the Statue of Liberty?
Well, so the Statue of Liberty, I went online to look to see if there were ticket cancellations for a crown access. Mm. But usually you have to book about 5 or 6 months. Sometimes, if you're lucky, maybe 3 months, but it's usually about 5 or 6 months out that you have to get a reservation. It's very cheap. It's only $22. It only costs maybe like $3 more than $2.50 more than the other ticket that you can get that is more easily available, but it just sells out so fast. Yeah. And then you don't know what weather or what's going to happen that day. And so, but I saw a cancellation for Friday the 13th, and I thought, I'm going to get that. I've always wanted to do the crown, and I've never known in advance. Usually I end up in New York 3 weeks after I have the idea. I don't have time to plan like that. So, I've done the pedestal, which is, so you can't get those same day. Those are also in advance. But I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so when I woke up on the 13th, the weather, it was raining. In the morning, it was pouring rain, and I thought, oh, this is going to be so miserable. Rain and the virus and the boat, but it started to clear up a little bit. I took a chance and went out there with a trash bag to throw, like a not actual trash bag, but
poncho,
or they're like in a little ball that you put on your belt, and you take it out, and it's like a rain poncho. I call it a trash bag. It's like this thing. But I had one of those and an umbrella, and I thought, okay, well, let's go check it out. And the Battery was pretty empty. There wasn't as many people out at the Battery. There was very few people compared to the last time I'd been to Statue of Liberty, as far as a line waiting to get into security. But there were still many people. So you go through, the equivalent of airport security, TSA, to even get onto the boat first off. And so you go through that, and then the boat was pretty packed. We were all sitting shoulder to shoulder on the boat.
Oh, wow.
I would say that there were maybe less people standing than there usually were. I think everybody got a seat, but it was still, crowded.
Yeah.
We got out to the island. When you get into the statue, just to climb up to the pedestal, you have to go up, like, I don't know exactly how many steps, but it's quite a walk. There were a lot of people up there at the pedestal, and there were a lot of people in the crown too. I'd say, it's a very little space, smaller than my kitchen.
Wow.
When you're up in the crown, it's not, you can't really walk around in there. It's very, just look out the crown, like little windows and stuff. But now there's a couple park rangers up there, and maybe like 20 to 25 people up there. When I reached up there, that were looking out, and that in hindsight, that was a very small space.
Yeah.
It was very hot, even though the weather that day was pretty nice outside. It's about 20 degrees warmer in the crown than it is outside.
From the body heat, or just because it's an enclosed area?
Yeah, it's enclosed. They had fans in there that were trying to circulate air, and it's really tight space. I mean, it's when you get up the pedestal part of it, the staircase is pretty normal, like a normal staircase that just spirals up. But this one that goes to the crown was the most narrow staircase I've ever climbed, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody with asthma or even like a slight problem with getting out of breath. And I definitely wouldn't do it in like the middle of July with New York.
Oh yeah.
It was awful, but yeah, and the view up there, there's better views of New York. But I wanted to do it for a bucket list.
You do it to say you did it, yeah.
And I think that it's because people are coming from all over the world. A lot of New York, people there are coming in as tourists, and they have these trips booked for a long time, and they get there, and that's even how I felt too. It's like, well, you're 2,500 miles from home. You better take advantage of what you can.
Right. You do a little bit crazier things than you would on your normal day to day. I think you also have a pretty interesting story of getting back home to the Central Valley, back to Fresno. What was it like cutting your vacation short and just trying to get home?
Well, my family was messaging and calling, especially starting on Friday the 13th, when it got to a point where it was all national news, and New York was, Westchester, New York it's not right where I was. I was down in the East Village on the south part of Manhattan. Mm-hmm. I'd say it was like 8 miles away, so it's close, but it wasn't far. But this Westchester was getting hit hard, and they were quarantining the city, at that point. And my family was really worried that they were going to restrict travel and wanted me to go home. And I was with, some of my close friends that were assuring me that, hey, if they close off travel, you're safe. You can stay here for months even, like you don't have to worry. And part of me was thinking, wonderful, I've always wanted to stay in New York. Why not? That's a risk that actually sounds good to take. And but my family was worried about if health insurance works the same out in New York as it does here, and would I have the same coverage for if I did get sick, what kind of coverage I'd have. And then I had one family member just absolutely panicking that I wasn't back home. So they were calling to offer to pay for a flight back home for me. And at that point, calling American, I had to call them twice, and both times I was on like their hold for 7.5 hours plus.
Wow.
And the first time I was told that my return flight from Baltimore back to Fresno would get my airline miles refunded so I could rebook my trip. but something went wrong and it
Oh.
didn't happen. So I had to spend another 7.5 hours on the following day to try to get, another agent on the line and tell me why I didn't get my miles back in there. And but by that point, my mom had convinced me that just pay for it, take it home.
Yeah.
Just get out of there. Please do it before next week.
What was the attitude like of the other passengers or the staff on the plane flying out of New York, out of this hot spot?
It was, okay, so number one, JFK Airport was dirty as heck. I remember going up the escalator to get to my terminal. This is my first New York on an American flight. It goes into a completely different terminal. And those that have taken American in New York probably know this well, that you go down an escalator and walk for a distance, and then you go back up an escalator to get into, the entry point to the, where the security is and things. And so I'm riding up this escalator to get to the, terminal gates, and it was just filthy. You could tell that they hadn't wiped any dust off of that escalator for probably, months. It was, you could just take your finger and draw pictures on it and stuff. I mean, it was nasty. And, and I had sanitizer, and I was washing my hands so much over the week that my hands were dry and breaking up. And I was really trying to be careful. And, there were not as many people in the airport, but the flight I was on was fully booked. And so people kept telling me, oh, at least you'll have an empty flight. And I'm like, no. And then getting on the flight itself, I took my wipes and I wiped down my tray table. Mm-hmm. I wiped down my seat. I wiped down the seat belt. I had a window seat, so I wiped down the window, the closing part of the window. All the plastic around it, and it was gross. There was like food splatter on my seat that was coming off with my wipes. And American was telling everybody, oh, it's safe to fly. And after every flight, we're sanitizing like the entire plane. I can assure you that nobody sanitized that plane that day. I mean, there was residue of soda and residue of some kind of sauce and stuff. Oh, man. It was just coming off real easy. I didn't have to scrub. It wasn't stuck on there. It was there. So, and then the gentleman that sat in front of me got real upset at the smell of the sanitizer and me scrubbing the chair that he was sitting in. And I'm not entirely sure how it all transpired, but at some point they had to move him because he was irate, and they moved him into another seat.
Oh, wow.
And there was a gentleman, and initially a child was sitting next to me on that flight, and the mother was on the other aisle. And so a guy that was sitting over there said, would you like for me to trade seats with your kid so you can sit together? So this guy comes and sits next to me, and his nose was running the whole time. It was like every 5 seconds I just hear, I was like, oh no, so it was, I was a little panicky about being in a tin can at that point anyways, and being on a flight, and who knows, but when somebody's sitting next to you and has some kind of sniffles. But I made it back to Fresno on the 2 flights. Arizona's airport was just like business as usual. They were packed, and people were just not as concerned as New York was. Wow. And in Fresno, people were at the baggage claim, not even covering their mouths while they were coughing. They were just it was so gross.
Especially this is quite a culture shock going from New York back, making your way westward, where people are just not, it's not on their mind.
Yeah, I just remember this one lady at the baggage claim at Fresno's airport, and she just kept coughing and coughing, and she wasn't coughing into her shoulder or into her arm or anything. It out in the open coughing, and she was on her phone, and she was on her phone and coughing, and
Oh my gosh.
I just started thinking, like, everywhere I would touch anything on this trip, and I was sanitizing, and anytime I'd get to a bathroom, even if I had just washed my hands or sanitized, I'd go back in there, wash again. I just couldn't believe returning to Fresno, and it just, I was like, oh, welcome home, where nobody seems to take precaution. And I got sick about 7 hours after I returned home. So.
Oh wow. So you made it back home, much to the relief of your family, and your turnaround time wasn't very long, huh?
Yeah, I got home, and I knew that I needed to go get groceries. I purposely had used up what I had, knowing I wouldn't be home for almost 3 weeks. So
Right.
I didn't have a whole lot of groceries, and so I did a little bit of grocery hunting at that point, and got stocked up with whatever I could find. There was a lot of grocery hoarding at that point here in Fresno, so there really wasn't a whole lot of things to pick from. But I was attempting to get as stocked as I could, and it was about 2 in the morning after I got home, and I had gone through the Taco Bell drive-through and was just about to sit down and have my first, I just got home and I'm gonna eat meal, and I wasn't feeling good. Wow. I just felt like I was starting to, get nauseated, and I thought, I think I'm not going to eat this. I'm just going to go to bed. And I woke up Monday, and it wasn't real bad the first couple days, but it just felt like I was sick, like I had a cold. Or I remember me making a video kind of early on where I was breathing out, and I recorded a video to show people that I was having some wheezing. When I was exhaling, and it just kind of felt like I was like in the beginning stages of a very mild cold.
Yeah.
It didn't feel flu-like at that point, but because of the breathing, because of the traveling, because of where I was. And then when I got home, I had a standard thermometer, like put under your tongue, and the bar increases thermometer. And I went to shake it, and I flew out of my hand and shattered on the ground. So I didn't have a thermometer for the first few days. So my mom eventually came over and said, you can borrow my ear thermometer. But at this point, I was social distancing already, just in case. So, my mom would drop it on the porch, and then she'd be 20 feet away, and then I'd go to the door and then take it inside. But, and my mom had picked me up from the airport. So I was in a car with my mom for, 15 minutes when I got back from New York. But I checked my temperature, and it was in the low 100s. And I thought, I better call my doctor first off, see what my doctor says. And my doctor said, go to community hospital, and, they'll do COVID testing, and that he had sent 2 or 3 people down there, and that I should drive down there and just to be on the safe side. So that started my adventure into testing.
The process of you trying to get a test and get the results from this test, it's from what I've heard and texted about with you and seen on your social media posts, sounds kind of crazy. Can you walk me through? So you go to community hospital on the recommendation of your doctor.
Right. So the doctor told me to go to Fresno Community. So I went to the downtown, and they've got tents set up outside for COVID. So they've got everybody that potentially is COVID infected in a separate area. But the process was walking in to the ER admittance area, and you talk to their triage nurse and let them know what your symptoms are. And then they determine if you go into the regular ER or you go to the COVID unit. So they heard, what I had to say, and they said, oh, you're going to the COVID unit. So they security checked me and, gave me a mask and take me down a long walkway into this, COVID tent that they had set up. And they just had, a whole operation in there of, getting admitted into the hospital system with your paperwork and then seeing a nurse, and they would check your vitals and check your temperature and all of that. And then the doctors were communicating via FaceTime.
Oh, remotely.
On iPads. So they had iPads set up at like eye level, and you'd sit in a chair, and then the doctor would be on there with FaceTime, and then they would call for the nurses to come over and check the vitals and, listen to the lungs or whatever he wanted to do. Like they were his physical arms and of the process, but the doctor was inside of the ER. And so they determined from my vitals and the fact that I just returned from New York, and that at that point, it was, even New York City was starting to turn into a hot spot on its own, that I was at high risk, and that they wanted me to have a COVID swab. They said for sure that I had some kind of viral infection. They just weren't sure. They said that influenza A mimics a lot of symptoms that COVID does. And so they wanted to rule out that first. So they did bear with me, I'm not a medical person. Let's just call it a nasal swab, okay?
Yeah.
I want to attempt. But they take this swab and it's this long.
Yeah.
And they put it up in your nose, they have you tilt back, and then it, in theory goes, up your nose, and then they tilt it, and then it goes further back, and It goes all the way back to where your throat would be.
Where it all meets in the back.
Yeah, and that's what that long word I can't say. That's what that is, whatever. So they take a sample and then they pull it back out, which stung like it just stung.
Yeah.
Say that the process itself didn't really hurt, but when they pulled it out, it was like I wanted my nose to run for like 30 minutes because it just burned.
Yeah.
And they said, we do the influenza A and B testing in-house. And then if those test negative, then we do a COVID test. So we'll check for those first, and you'll know within a couple hours. And then they said the COVID tests take 3 to 5 days.
Yeah.
I had inquired because it was a Thursday at that point. It's 3 to 5 days, including the weekend. And the hospital said yes. Labs are going nonstop. So Thursday the 19th, when I got the swab done, I would say I'm counting Monday the 16th as my first day where I was like real sick.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear back from anybody until March 31st.
Wow. During this time, from the 19th when you got tested, or even the 16th when you started to feel symptoms, what were your symptoms like during that time?
I've never felt as sick as I've ever been. After the testing, after I'd gotten home, and it turned into the worst flu I've ever had. I had dizziness. I couldn't really focus on anything. Everything was making me feel real dizzy. I had a lot of confusion. I had a low-grade fever that kept bouncing around. So, I checked my temperature, it would be 99.6. 99.8, and then I'd check it like 30 minutes later, and it would be 101.8, and then I'd check it like 7 or 8 times, to make sure, and it was 101.8 at one point, and then another hour later check it again, and it would have dropped back down 100.4. So it was all over the place. The fever didn't stay constant. That meant I had to check the temperature a lot. So it was good. I had a ear thermometer one that you just push a button and get a reading. And, and I'd oftentimes check in both ears and, make sure. I always wanted to make sure that I was getting multiple readings. And the fever lasted for probably about a week. maybe a little longer. I'd have to look back on my notes, but I think it was about a week. And then there was one point in the middle of it where I felt so nauseous. I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I just nothing would settle well. I was eating Jello and things like that prior, but I mean, I got to a point where even Jello, I couldn't eat it. I would try to drink Gatorade to get fluids and electrolytes in me, and I would only be able to drink like a quarter of a 32-ounce Gatorade, and I would feel completely full, like my body couldn't take any more Gatorade, and I knew that wasn't the case because I would have been, half a day without having fluid. I had to force myself knowing you have to get fluids or you're going to be dehydrated, but it was tough. And so really I was on a water and Gatorade diet for like 3 days. And I remember coming downstairs to get some Gatorade, and I couldn't even make it to the kitchen. I sat in a chair and everything was so dizzy and spinning, and I felt so gross and nauseous, and I'd been throwing up, and I was starting to have the chest pain, and I was having troubles breathing, and I just told myself, hey, if you gotta go, if you gotta go, just let your body go. Don't worry about like staying alive right now. Worry about this second and just fight through this second. And and I was on the phone with a friend, very concerned, and just like, stay on the phone with me. I don't know I'm gonna make it right now. I didn't want to be around anybody in case I had COVID. I didn't know. I knew in my heart I probably had it by that point, but a lot of people were arguing that, oh, your symptoms are not typical, or people with COVID don't have all this stuff. And, but I just felt like I wasn't even going to make it through that night. And I lost, after the nausea kind of went down a little bit, I lost my smell. I lost taste. I would eat stuff and it had to have no flavor to it. It just tasted flavorless. And every time my heater or my air conditioner would turn on, it smelled like something was wrong, like dirt or dust or something. And I can assure you that wasn't the case, because I had somebody service my unit like 6 months prior. But it was very scary, the number of symptoms I was having. That lasted for quite a while, and then eventually the fever broke, and eventually, some of the flu-like symptoms, like the dizziness, got better. But one symptom from day one that I've had is an extreme fatigue.
Yeah.
Where you just feel so tired. You can sleep for 16 hours and still feel like you need to go to bed. Like this is extreme fatigue. It's not like coming home from work and fatigue. Like it's debilitating fatigue. That continued even though that I didn't have a fever, even though that I wasn't feeling nauseous. After a while, my taste came back. After a while, the smell returned to normal.
Oh, good.
So I thought, well, okay, things are starting to get better. And then about 2 weeks after no fever, that's when I had my first relapse of fever.
Really?
And sometime before then was about when that test result came back. So, I didn't know through the initial illness that I was sick on the 31st, which was 13 days after my ER visit, or the 16th day of being sick. So, and so when the doctor called, he's like, how are you feeling? And I'm like, very sick. He's like, oh, I was thinking you might say that. He's like, has anybody called you yet? And I'm like, no, but I know why you're calling. And he's like, oh, you do? You tested negative for influenza A and B. I said, yeah, I saw that result online like 2 hours. He said, yeah, but you did test positive for, COVID-19, or they call it, he called it by, the more proper name, which is like SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
And I thought, I had a moment of just, even though I knew it was coming, even though I already knew, but it just gave me anxiety to hear the ER doctor call and tell me that, and, tell me that my results are now sent to the health department and that they'll be in contact with next steps. And when you're in their system, they give you an individualized quarantine. or
Wow.
they get it for legal purposes. They send you like they send the county order, and they send you one that's like, hey, you've been tested, and we're expecting that you'll stay home, and if you need to get medicine, you need to have somebody else get it for you, and if you need to get groceries, you need to have somebody else get it for you.
How has your experience with the health department in Fresno County been?
Mixed.
Yeah.
I have the most wonderful caseworker that works with me. She's amazing. She's actually very, I don't know, sometimes when you go through illness and nobody has any answers, I mean, I'm the first wave here. The doctors don't have full explanations of what's going on. Every other day they're changing their minds, and the professionals of what works and what doesn't work. But like nobody knows what they're doing. They're just throwing stuff like, oh, hey, you have COVID? Let me try this and see what happens. Like, okay, like, is it safe? Like, some people look at it as, oh, well, Fresno at this time only has 7 deaths, and so it's not that big of a deal. Or, oh, it's just a flu, and it takes 3 or 5 days and people get over it and it's no big deal. So, just give it to me so that, I can get immunity and go back to work. Or, there's people that think it's conspiracy, or, but the hard part is all the people that I, thought would be there for me. Some were, some weren't, some were questioning what I was going through, or, oh, there's no way you could still be sick from COVID on day 20, day 30. Like, yes, like, I didn't think so either, but
Yeah.
it's true. And talking to the RN that is assigned to my case, somebody that has been there every step, that understands and isn't questioning what's going on, and more so concerned and providing advice. And that's what people need. You need to have people that are there to be supportive, not be like, oh, well, you probably don't have COVID, or, oh, well, it's probably not COVID anymore, or I've never had that experience from the health department. They're usually like, oh my gosh, you need to call your doctor. And she's been wonderful. And I feel like genuinely is not only concerned about me, but also concerned about making sure that the people she's in contact with are staying out of the public. Like personally, like I haven't left the house but to go to health workers, but not everybody is that responsible. And when you have a confirmed communicable disease like that, there is a health and safety code, there is a law, and you are under quarantine until released. And if you don't want to abide by what they're telling you, then it's a misdemeanor.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not a speeding ticket. It's not an infraction. You don't pay a fine. And I'm taking it very seriously. I have not left the house unless that I get permission from the health department.
You're non-binary transgender. You've been transitioning. What has the pandemic or your own personal illness with the virus done to your transitioning?
This is an interesting question to bring up. My community, and when I say my community, I mean transgender in general, not just non-binary, because everybody that is transgender or non-binary or both have a very different story about what they're going through. But a lot of people that are transgender have what's called gender dysphoria, and a lot of times it's referred to as that they feel like they're like, the body that they have is like betraying who they are. That's not always necessarily the case, but it's more about, the reason that we do what we do is to live a peaceful life. And just like anybody going through mental health, which I don't think being transgender is mental health related, but just any ailment that you go through in life, you figure out how to deal with it, how to improve it, and you go with that. And for those of us that that are transgender, are women, are men, are non-binary people, and we look into a mirror and we go, that is not who I am. Like I'm, for a trans woman, they look in a mirror and they see all the male features and they're like, it distresses them because inside they are a woman, 110%. Like you could not like ever be wrong about that. Like they know, but then they look at themselves and they're like, hey, I'm not presenting the way I want to. There's a lot of things that give me distress about just, and some things you can control and some things you can't. Like trans women, a lot of them would love to be able to bear their own children. They can't because they don't have ovaries, but they're still a woman. And so there's a lot of challenges. Now with COVID, what we've lost are what people think are elective surgeries or optional surgeries or plastic surgeries or cosmetic surgeries or however they want to say stuff like that. And it's not for the trans community. These are life-saving surgeries. Somebody that doesn't feel like, anybody that if you're in a lot of distress, you got to do something about it or you're going to end up like in trouble. And if that distress means having corrective surgeries for genitals or having corrective surgeries for breast reduction or enlargement or anything, like these surgeries save people from that distress so that they can, carry on their life and not worry about the stress and can focus on the things that everybody else gets to focus on, like, what are my hobbies and, my career, things like that, instead of worrying about, this distress. And so that's why supporting trans people is so important generally without the COVID is that, believe whatever you want, but people are just trying to live their best lives, their authentic lives. And, this is all that they can do, is to do these surgeries or present a certain way or live a certain life. And it's life-changing. It really is life-changing for somebody to like be affirmed in who they really truly are inside by their family, by their friends. And, a lot of people, like if I look back 5 years ago, I looked very masculine. And if I asked people like, hey, believe me that I'm mostly feminine inside, like, I don't think people would have been able to even understand at all. Like, even if they were trying to be nice, like what does that mean? Like, I don't get it. Like, I hear you, but I don't understand it because I'm not going through it.
Yeah.
Where now, for me, like I've done a lot of like laser hair removal on my face so that when I look at my face, even when, it's, not shaved for 3 days, I don't see shadow. That drives me crazy. Like my own gender dysphoria, like that's a big bother. I haven't been able to go to laser. Now, in my case, I'm not able to go do anything because I'm quarantined, so, and even if all of the doctor's offices in the world were still open, just like I said, I wouldn't want my worst enemy to get this virus. I wouldn't want for any of my doctors to get it neither. So, I'm doing the right thing to not have anything done, but that doesn't make it easy. And there are people that are not sick that are staying at home and they can't get to their surgeries. They had scheduled surgeries for long periods of time to confirm to their gender, to, whatever that they needed, and they can't get them. They're canceled. They're not available. It's not, they're treating it as an elective surgery, a optional thing. And that's really tough because that's what alleviates this distress.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking that it's being categorized in that way.
There's people that are trans that haven't even come out yet. There's people that are trans that maybe just came out while they've been on their quarantine, or maybe that they've been out and they're in the beginning processes. But this stuff is important to a lot of people, and to tell somebody that you can't, it's these things are protecting people's mental health from distress. It's protecting people from things like suicide. I mean, there's such a high suicide rate in like trans people. There's a lot of factors into why that is, but and for me, I'm not waiting on a surgery right now, and personally, but I do understand how that affects. But
My heart goes out to you and the entire trans community.
like, there's so much more of me than being trans or being COVID-19 positive. Like, I'm so much more like.
Thank you. Thank you for chatting with me. Thank you for your selflessness. I always enjoy getting to sit down and catch up with you.